Welcome back to Skywise Observations. The time is noon o'clock on this Tuesday, June 9th, 2026. Well, have you been following along episode by episode with content on this channel? You might understand and realize that what I bring forth is all connected together. And so people can get lost within my content through not following along episode by episode, because once again, things tend to connect on a daily basis as more and more information and observations come forth. Now, once again, if you've been following along with my content, first and foremost, I was quite surprised that this platform did not flip-flop yesterday's content as I was expecting to happen, which I posted a comment in the last recording from last night stating exactly that. Otherwise, this morning I have been doing a little bit of searching through the Google search engine, and I began taking screenshots over the interests that I decided to search out through Google. And it kind of flows together and connects together, if you will, if you're thinking outside of the box. This slideshow goes by rather quickly, so if you are interested in what is available as far as the information, you might want to pause occasionally to ensure that you are reading everything. Because, well, within this information, you also have to read in between the lines. Now, Google, or its AI program, and myself basically got to a point of bumping heads over the Mandela effect. It does not want to give up on its program narrative over said Mandela effect. I tried to get it to think otherwise. It would not comply. So right there you have to read between the lines. Within one of the screenshots there is the number 47 that I underlined in red. 47 seems to be quite the common number ever since the 47th president was inaugurated in this country of the United States. You will see another section of a sentence that was underlined in red because apparently the AI program had a little bit of an issue. So make sure that you catch that underlined sentence, if you will. So in conclusion of that slideshow presentation, I will continue on pertaining to the last couple of screenshot images and the information thereof pertaining to clouds. Okay? And we have quite the overcast, cloudy conditions, of which we are getting some very light fall out from overhead. Yes, it is kind of very lightly misting out here. The light has been appearing for very short durations. Supposedly, we could see more of that as this day continues, but it's very strange. I swear, they just don't know what to expect, and especially Google, because I cannot rely on Google's weather notifications anymore. And this is, once again, as I've stated in the past content, no, not through Google weather, but Google notifications itself pertaining to the weather in my area. And it has not been providing accurate information whatsoever. And of course, I've gone into researching a little bit on that, and it comes up with a great many excuses, not reasons, but excuses to explain. So anyways, we shall continue on with the slideshow, and then thereafter we'll go ahead and talk clouds and UFOs. Stay tuned. Continue watching, won't you please? Alrighty, returning at 12:25 p.m. And please forgive me, this might turn out to get very lengthy as there is so much to connect. But we are going to attempt to do this in a what if manner, if you will, to where it is just theoretical, imaginary scenarios, okay? We're not going to state that anything that we are to see or hear from this point forth can be deemed as factual. So we'll just stick to a so-called sci-fi style of a presentation. And we are going to try, through this what-if scenario, just to make some connections, or connect the dots, if you will, to possibly see a little bit bigger of a picture. So at the end of the slideshow presentation, We have the factor of UFOs and clouds. Okay? So we'll go ahead and go to a different source of material before we jump into what you are seeing in front of you. Okay, so I am going to read this quote once again from the Journal of the Lewis and Clark Expedition pertaining to the Indians came out and sat by me and smoked. They said, we came from the clouds, etc., etc., and we're not men, etc., etc. This is a common theme among many, many cultures of seeing beings or entities or even crafts associated with UFOs, flying saucers, and so on and so forth. Many cultures. But what I find very interesting is the factor of this being stated within the journals of that expedition, and it is that expedition that I have been planning on examining for many reasons. And it was supposed to have been a special presentation over on my secondary channel, but due to complications through this platform, that won't come into being. But I still have plans on doing this Lewis and Clark expedition presentation in the future, because it holds many, many, many strange and odd encounters and experiences. And again, you have to read in between the lines, because there's a lot to that story that has been hidden. But we'll go on to that in the future once again. Now then, I'm going to bring up the factor of reincarnation, and I am going to read a little bit from a book of which a group of people spoke with an entity, an interdimensional entity, if you will, in order to gain knowledge and to understanding this planet or this place that we call home for, a few years until we die. Unless, of course, you do believe in reincarnation. Which, yeah, I've got a playlist on that. You might want to check that out, but I'm going to start off with that so that we can lead into more pertaining to UFOs and the Bible. We have told you that humans invariably reincarnate in human form, and this is a fact. As long as a species is planet bound, as you are, then their experience will be limited to the species to which all of the entity members are cast. When a species gets out into the larger realms of the galaxy, then it is often useful to experience life in different species as well as in different bodies. Since the soul's modes, goals, centers, attitudes, and chief features are all universal, there is much to be gained in this experience. When humankind evolves and enters the ranks of the space-going species, then human souls will also experience trans-species reincarnation. That is still very much in the future, and we suggest that you attend to the task you have set for yourself in this world. Okay, so does that mean that we don't experience life as dolphins or whales or whatever? I think it would be kind of fun to be a dolphin or a whale, don't you? You will be able to do that when humankind is not planet bound. Till that time, you will experience life in human form only. So, conversation continues on. So next you're talking about UFOs. It was not our intention to do so. We are here to answer your questions. Alright then, are there UFOs? And if so, what are they? Most are simply what their name implies, unidentified flying objects. A few are robot monitors. A few are those making studies. A few are lost. A few are what you would probably call tourists. They do not all represent one species. They are from many places and cultures. So now the conversation gets a little heated. Well, that's absurd. First whales and dolphins, now little green men from outer space. We did not say there were little green men, though there are species, or there are two species not unlike your own. Others are so vastly unlike you that it is improbable that you would, that it is probable, yeah, sorry, I apologize. Others are so vastly unlike you that it is it is probable that you would not recognize them as living, let alone sentient. I read a book that there's aliens on the moon. There have been extraterrestrials on the moon in the past. Most of their activity was confined to what you call the dark side. There are a few robot machines still there, more of them devoted to mining than anything else, though there are 2 monitor stations recording activity in the solar system. Again, a little bit of friction to the conversation. Come off it. I'm a biologist and I tell you all of this sounds like so much bullshit. You mean that you are frightened, and your chief feature will not allow you to admit that you might be wrong. We impart information without bias. It is yours to accept or reject as you choose. Your acceptance or rejection, however, does not in any way alter these facts. Our purpose is to answer your questions. If you wish to know more of the other ensouled species in the physical universe, you have only to ask. Most of these species that go into space are late, young, and early mature, only slightly more advanced than your world is now. There are other species, however, that due to their physical nature enter at much earlier stages in their evolution. Some enter later, some not at all. Those species that you might recognize as being akin to plants rather than animals do not often go into space, though some of them are active in dealing with travelers. There were some early observers of this planet, but a great many of the ancient civilizations that you regard as primitive were more advanced than you realize. However, don't underestimate or underrate your own species. If you assume that any and all advances had to be given to you by extraterrestrial visitors, you are wrong. That's why we have brains, right? So now let's go ahead and try to use some of those brain cells and make these what-if connections. Okay, so we have throughout history many of these so-called UFO sightings as well as abductions. Okay, and we can get into that a little bit further. But what I want to do is go to this book here. Because when people think of UFOs in relation to the Bible, right away they think of and Ezekiel saw the wheel. And you know, most people out there say, yeah, what is explained that Ezekiel seen and encountered and was abducted by was something similar to this, right? A wheel, a spinning wheel, and so on, so on, so on, as far as his description. But it also involves clouds. So let's go from Ezekiel seeing the wheels and people believing that he was actually witnessing these either extraterrestrial or interdimensional things. So, what other examples of possible UFOs are found in the Bible? What about Jonah and the fish? No, it was not a whale. Just like the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil was not an apple. It just says it was a fruit. So that gives you plenty to read into, because the stories of the Bible, many of them, as far as the stories, not the poems, not the songs, not the so-called history, but the stories. And the Bible has a plethora of stories. Stories that can be rebuked, debated, and debunked for what they really were in reality. So once again, let's think about Jonah and the fish. Maybe that was actually a USO, an underwater submersible object. After all, he was swallowed up for 3 days. Wow, that fish must have had an awful lot of oxygen, right? Huh. And the thing is, what's that fish do after 3 days? Spit Jonah out upon the land. Huh. Okay. Well, once again, to me, that does not make any sense of any kind of fish, prehistoric or otherwise, that has the capability of swallowing up a person and they can continue to live for a period of 3 days. Because I am a fisherman and I know what happens to a steel hook when it's lodged inside of the mouth of a fish. It rusts away and deteriorates very quickly. So right there really gives me doubt over that story of it being an actual living organic fish. Well, let's go to the Tower of Babel, or Babel. Was it really a stone tower in the attempts to reach God? Or was it actually a flying machine, such as what is known in the land of India as a Vimana? Because after all, the illustrations of the Vimanas are practically identical to what you are seeing right here in front of you. Okay? And I've shown this in past content with illustrations of the Vimanas in comparison to this, and very close to being identical in nature. Alright? At least through the illustrations. But once again, we're just doing this what if scenario. Okay? But what if the tower was actually some type of a craft, a spaceship that they were building? And instead of the story or narrative of God changing the languages of all the peoples to where they could not continue construction of this spaceship, or actually tower as the narrative goes. But maybe it was a factor of migration, because they needed people from other countries, lands distant and far away, to come in to help build. But because you had so many different languages in one area, it got very confusing. And need I say more? Pursuant to the stories of Jesus. Well, initially, his life began as a so-called angel came down upon a cloud and visited Mary. Right? And then somehow an immaculate conception took place through the glory of God. Well, let's go to that what if scenario of UFOs. And maybe it was some type of a craft that came down, did an abduction scenario in order for hybridization, impregnation, so that, artificial insemination and gene splicing took place upon this very advanced craft of which Mary was taken. And of course, conception was a success, gestation played out, and then we have the life and times of Jesus. Well, a little bit of that, because after all, in the good book, we hear about his birth, and then he goes to school, and then we don't hear from the guy for another 30 years, or give or take, right? But alas, then came the time of the crucifixion, resurrection, and what did he eventually, after, he resurrected and hung around for a little bit longer, and then, up on a cloud, he rose into the heavens. Once again, on a cloud. Okay? But within this what if scenario, well, maybe he was just beamed aboard some type of a spacecraft. Now I could go on with many, many more examples out of within this book pertaining to clouds and these beings known as angels and no, because once again there's just far too many examples that I could pull from this book that within that what if scenario would actually be flying saucers and so-called aliens, as well as alien abductions and so on and so on. So, are there ships out in space floating above to Earth? Do they have beings from other planets watching us? I tell you what, one thing is for certain, a lot of these crafts are mechanical in nature, right? Solid objects, but with some very uncanny abilities. So many different styles and shapes of crafts, as well as so-called light anomalies, which could possibly be organic, and which we could also have crafts that are a mixture of organic, mechanical, and instilled with a type of artificial intelligence. Yes, these glow balls in the sky, living lights. Okay? But then again, this right here to me is a possible what if scenario of what we really live or reside upon or within, which is nothing more than a giant drop of water when you really think about it. And of course, these so-called UFO beings, well, we got the tridactyls in Peru, the mummified remains of those. We got these mummies with elongated heads that have that don't have the sutures, the skull sutures like what we have. In fact, the skulls and the vertebrae do not align nowhere near like how ours do. We have all these recordings of Bigfoot, and now people are using AI to clean up these images of Bigfoot as well as UFOs and aliens. So and these things have been around since the dawn of time, since the first recorded accounts in history, with talks of gods and goddesses and so on and so forth. So once again, we have these so-called alien abductions or evil kidnappings, okay? But then we have to also consider that in life there's opposites to everything. And of course, that great karmic law of for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. And so, we have many people that have gone under hypnotherapy and have recalled accounts pertaining to their abductions and how their sexual organs were manipulated, probed, and so on and so forth, which makes it out to seem very evil indeed. But, well, if that was the case scenario of how Jesus was brought about, I guess it's not just evil intentions after all, is it? Again, what if? Long ago, people knew about UFOs and they were just as puzzled by them as we are. Only then they were known as mature spirits, elves, gnomes, and goblins. Sorry. Okay, and then they talk about these airships. Well, you know what? What's really crazy? You see this ship right here? See how it's in the clouds? I actually have recordings to where it shows sightings very similar to this. Very similar. Strange. And that's not a what if, that is a fact. And then we get to human-made UFOs. Okay? There might be many of those today, right? But one would have to ask, well, how are we to understand and reverse engineer anything that might have crash landed of these UFOs or whatever? We just don't have the intelligence because we can't understand another species from out there or within there, and their technologies, it'd be too far advanced for us to understand, right? Oh, well, how about the use of artificial intelligence? Well, maybe that's what this is all about, is that maybe existence in itself is a factor of artificial intelligence. That somehow it's involved in creating organics. Regardless of how you see it, fact or fiction, the puzzle continues. You will see by now that there are no easy answers to the UFO puzzle. They could be almost anything, spaceships from other planets or crafts from inside the Earth. They could be living light or even time travelers from the future. If they can control our minds, then it may be that they are allowing us to see only a small part of them. That way we cannot learn the whole story. But for now, we cannot prove anything about UFOs. One thing is for sure, UFO sightings cannot be overlooked. Everything cannot be explained away, but there are many more questions than answers about UFOs. They continue to be a mystery to us all, especially why they are so connected to the clouds. I think that's enough. We'll leave off with that. I could go on with so much more, but this is already too long in duration and length, so we shall end it here. Thanks for watching. Take care. Have a great one. Skywise out.